Welcome back to the training on how to build a to-do app using the Dittofi Design Studio. In this tutorial, we're just going to clean up this page a little bit, so to restart it slightly, and we're going to add the functionality to be able to delete one of the to-dos or a to-do that's added to our to-do list. So where we left things off last time is that if I preview this application, we gave the ability for our application to be able to, for users of our application to be able to add new to-dos. So for example here, I could type in adding or go to work today. That could be a to-do that I have to do, and I add that, and then that came on the list at the bottom down here. What we want to do is we want to be able to remove items now from this list. And to do that, it's again exactly the same process as we went through before. So if I remind you again quickly of what we've done so far, we've set up continually kind of like new features of our front end and also new features of our back end, where we've configured endpoints, actions, and originally we configured underlying everything our data model. So to give functionality for users to be able to delete a particular to-do that they've added, what we need to do is we need to go over to our endpoints tab first of all, and we want to set up the back end portion of our system. So the same way that we got data all out of our database, or we added new to-dos to our database. In this case, we want to be able to give the option to delete a single record from our or single to-do from our to-dos list. So to do this, let's start off by kicking off a new endpoint. We're going to call this delete to-do, like that. We're going to give it a path, call it v1 delete delete, if I spell it right, delete to-do. Now this one's again slightly different from the last one in that you have to finish off the path with the words or with the letters ID, and you need to surround that with curly braces. The reason you need to do that is because if you remember, in our database we've got an ID column which represents the unique value for a particular row of data. So we've got a walk the dog, buy some bread, and those each have IDs of 1 and 2, and then we have buy some fish and chips with an ID of 8. So what we're going to do here is we need to, when we delete a record, we need to specify which record we're deleting. We do that by identifying a unique record by its ID field. So we pass to our variable, to our endpoint in this case, an ID variable which will allow us to know which record we're going to be deleting. So that's what this ID stands for here. The request method in this case needs to be set to delete, and you remember in the past tutorials we set a get and a post up. In this case we're doing a delete because we're deleting a record from the database. And then if we scroll down, so where does this ID get set? It's what's called a path variable because it's set in the path of the endpoint. So here we need to press the add button. We are going to be sending the ID itself as a number, so we pick number here and we type in ID there, and it's important that this ID, first of all, it's required, and we press the save button, but also that the name of the ID here, the ID matches what's in our path up here as ID within the curly braces. So once we've done that, we're going to press save, and we're going to go over to our action to create our associated action. So now creating our delete action. So I'm going to do this quite quickly because we've done it a few times now. So we're going to have this as delete to do action. We're going to pick a trigger again up as the endpoint, which is going to be delete to do. We're going to press the save button down here, and we're going to add to our actions and events graph the particular ID and model that we're going to delete. So what you'll see actually, if we go to delete here, now we have this option here for an object. So when we select the kind of event that we want to run, it's the delete event because we're going to be deleting the record. But this object is the actual record that we want to delete. So this actually won't work. If I click this button here and I look to see what object I'm supposed to delete, all I have here is the ID of the record that I need to delete. What I actually need to do is I need to find out here in this variable what the inside my event, what is the actual record. I need to look up the record that I'm going to delete. So to do that, I'm going to come up here and I'm going to pick a model, because the model is going to give me the structure of the record that I'm going to delete. I'm going to give it a label, so to delete seems good. I'm going to copy that over here, and I think you have to remove like so. And then on the model here, I'm going to select this to to-dos. So we don't want to delete everything, but what we do want to do is we want to set a where clause up here to say we only want to delete records where the ID is equal, the ID of the record is equal to the ID that's being passed in from our endpoint. So that's where we set that up here, and we press save down here. Now, if we come back up to our actions and events graph, so you can see we've got a create event here, so that's incorrect. What we want to do here is we want to set this kind up to delete, so we can actually delete a record from the database. So within here, we can say, okay, we're going to delete a record. We're going to click here, pick an actual, oh, did I not save? I need to make sure I've saved here. Inside here, I'm going to pick the delete event, and then in my object, I have inside my action now, I have the model that I'm going to delete. So I'm going to press OK on that. So I've actually looked up now the individual record that I'm going to delete. If I press save, I've looked up the individual record I'm going to delete, and now I've associated that record with this object here, with this to delete object. So now this is all properly configured. Just double check and press save again. I can then come up here and I can regenerate my code for my app. So we're going to call this delete endpoint for To App, and press the generate code button here. And that's going to generate, again, writing in the background, writing out that Google Go code that we showed in the last tutorial. So once that's generated, which we'll do in a second, I can test out this endpoint. So the same as last time, when I press run, it's going to prompt me to enter the path ID of a variable I want to delete. And that's because normally we would be sending that path variable, that ID, from, we'd collect it up by the user clicking on something within the front end of the system. However, in this case, we're forcing the endpoint to start, so we're required to enter something manually here. So I'm just going to take a quick look at the table. So we've got 1, 2, and 8. So if I wanted to delete the buy fish and chips option here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here, I'm going to press run, and I'm going to have to enter the path variable here, which is going to be set to the number 8. If I run this and close that down, you'll see we get a code 200 response. Now, we're not returning any information at this point, so again, our body down here is empty. But if we come back up to this table, we can refresh our page. And when that's refreshed, we can see that the number 8 has actually deleted from here. And number 12 has popped in. I think that's because I was testing a minute ago, but we could delete that number 12 as well from here. So we can do run on that. And then if I come back up here, this number 12, go to work today, should also delete from there. So now that's gone. So we just got two records remaining. So now what we've done is we've built an endpoint which is able to receive an ID of a record that it wants to delete. That then causes an action to start, which then goes and finds that, looks up that record with the associated ID, and then we'll delete it from our database. So that's good, but we want to now associate that with our front-end workflows. So to do that, it's the same process again as in the other videos. We need to go over to our workflows tab. Now, in this case, we actually don't need a variable set here because the variable is going to be picked up when the user clicks on an image in this case. So this is going to be a slightly different setup, but largely the same. So Here I'm going to press the new action button and I'm going to set up a new workflow. So this is going to be delete a single to do, something like that in the name. And then for this one, what I need to do is I need to set up an input variable. So the input variable here is going to be the ID to delete. That's the name I'm going to give to it. And this is going to be equal to a number. So it's going to be equal to the ID of the record that we're going to delete when we click on an image of a bin icon in the front end, which we're going to put in a minute. There's going to be save changes on this. So it's ID to delete, and that's a number. Save that workflow. And then again, same as in the other tutorials, we're going to add an event there. This is going to run the delete do option. We're going to get a response code, which is going to be endpoint response code. Let's call that for delete option, something like that. Code, because it's the code. And then we're going to set up a path variable. So the path variable now is the path variable on our endpoint that we set up. So that was under here, ID. So where do we get the ID from? Well, it's going to get passed in from our ID to delete, which we just set up. If I press OK on that and save, which we just set up here as an input variable. So this is a variable that the user is going to actually input into the front end of the system. But we're actually going to collect this kind of a bit more automatically than the user typing it in. We're going to associate it with an image. After we've run that endpoint, so after we've collected up that ID, we've run that endpoint, which is then going to go look up the ID of the record to delete. We're going to then create a set field. We want to set the fields again so that we have that refresh option. And to do that, we're going to just run an action again, and the action we're going to run is just going to be the get all to do's, which we set up in the very first part of this series. So save that down there and save that here. Now the final step of the process in this example is just to get a image of a bin on the page so we can associate that with a delete icon. So I'm going to grab an image here. Enter that using the arrow here, which enters it as the child of this div block. It's going to enter it in at the end of the div block here. So I'm going to do like that. That's going to enter it in there. I'm now going to pick up a image, which I loaded in earlier. So this is going to be a bin icon here. I'll press the OK button. So now we've got a bin icon. I'm just going to resize this image a little bit because it's a bit large. So what we can do here is we can do, I think like 50% or something of its original size, or maybe something smaller, 25% of the original size, or even smaller, maybe 10% of the original size. Okay, that seems more reasonable. And then what we can do up here is we can use these options in order to space it out a little nicer along the top. So the final thing we want then is when the user clicks this image, we want them to be able to delete a particular row of data. So to do, or a particular to do. So to do that, we need to set up associate a workflow with an on-click event. So here we're going to do add workflow. We're going to pick a trigger, which is going to be on click. We're going to have a workflow, which is delete a single to do. And we're going to, when the user clicks that single to do, we need to pick up the ID of that particular to do. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this input variable. Now this input variable is only available because in our workflow we set an input variable up here. So inside here, now I've got this option for an input variable. You'll notice if I pick like an add new to do, that vanishes, and that's because when we did the add new to do workflow, it didn't have the input variable option associated with it. So that's why we know that this is the ID of this row, but we still need to bind it to the correct variable. So here I'm going to just do row.id as the formula. So that's looking up the individual row from the list of all the to-dos that are represented in this repeating group, and it's then saying let's get the ID of that element, so row.id, which will be 1 or 2 here in this table, and the IDs for whatever else we make. So that's everything set up now. So come up here to the top corner, and it's file again, and then save again, and that's the same as all the other times we've done it. I'm just going to check quickly. I haven't changed anything else. We've got the workflow set up here. That's all saved down. So now we should be able to generate the code for this app for delete workflow. And now what we've done, while that's just generating in the background, we've set up now everything from the user interface. We've set up the on-click trigger, which is going to send the ID as the input variable back to the endpoint, which is going to receive that ID as part of the path, that we set up. That's going to trigger an action, which is going to go and delete the data from the data model. So just to illustrate how this works, I'm going to just press the preview button up here now that the code is generated. Press the preview button. So we're just going to add quickly here an example to do. In fact, we can add back in the buy some fish and chips option. And chips. And press the add to do. And let's just say now I've already walked the dog, so I can press the delete option here. And that's now going to delete the walk the dog option. So now we've associated this bin icon with that ID, with that endpoint, and so now we've added the ability for our application to add new to-dos, and then also to delete the ones that we've already done. So I think that's good for the moment. I think for the next session, I'll just spend 15 minutes starting this, so you can kind of see how that works. And then the very final thing to do will be to add the edit event, and then we'll have done the create, the read, the update, and the delete statements. So we'll be able to get data out of our data models, we'll be able to write data to our data models, and we'll be able to delete records. So that kind of gives you enough functionality to kind of then start playing around with the application with a bit more power. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope that we'll see you again for the next one.